The Duke of Wycombe had come to beg, though he would never have called it that, and the woman he had come to beg from kept him waiting 11 minutes in her own marble hall, which was precisely as long as it took her to finish the business that mattered more than a duke. He heard her before he saw her. Through the half-open door of the great study at Westhaven came a low, even voice settling the matter of a flooded coal seam at Hartop, the wages of 40 men, and the price of pig iron in Sheffield, all in the space of 3 sentences, each one final. A man's voice answered her, deferent, anxious, a man twice her years asking leave, then a second matter, and a third, dispatched with the same unhurried economy, and the Duke of Wycombe, standing in the hall of the largest private fortune in the West Riding with his hat in his 2 hands, understood that whatever else Mrs. Frances Weston was, she was not a person who would be hurried by his rank. He had heard of her for 3 years, the way one hears of weather coming. Mrs. Weston of Westhaven, the wool and iron widow, who had taken a dead husband's middling concern and built it into a thing that touched every village within 30 miles, who held the leases of half the West Riding and, as the Duke had learned a fortnight ago, in a solicitor's office in London, with the floor going soft beneath him, the mortgages on a great deal of the other half, including, it transpired, the better part of the Wycombe estate. His own father had begun the borrowing. His steward had managed it, and the paper had been bought up quietly, parcel by parcel, over 9 years, by a woman no one in his world had ever troubled to meet. The doors opened. His Grace the Duke of Wycombe, the footman said, and the Duke went in to ask a stranger to save his house, and stopped 2 steps inside the door, because the room had gone wrong. His sister had come into it ahead of him, Lady Augusta, 28, and the only soul he had trusted to bring on so humiliating an errand, and Augusta had stopped dead in the middle of the Turkey carpet, with her gloved hand against her mouth, and the Duke's own man of business, Mr. Garrick Dunmore, who had served the dukedom for 25 years, and arranged this very meeting, and walked in at the Duke's shoulder full of oily confidence, had gone the colour of tallow. He had stopped too. He was staring at the woman behind the desk, as a man stares at a thing he had buried, and watched walk out of the ground. The woman behind the desk was perhaps 30, plainly and beautifully dressed in dove grey, with a still face and dark, steady eyes, and her hands folded on a worn little pocket ledger that lay closed before her. She was not a beauty in the way the Duke's world counted beauty. She was something the Duke's world had no column for. She rose, unhurried, and inclined her head exactly as much as a duke was owed, and not 1 degree more. "Your Grace," she said, "you are welcome to Westhaven. I believe you know Mr. Dunmore." Her eyes moved to the steward, and rested there a moment, mild as milk. "And I believe Mr. Dunmore knows me." The Duke did not know her. That was the strangest part. The part Frances had prepared herself for across 9 years, and found, in the event, still had the power to take the breath from her. She had carried his face the whole of that time. He had not carried hers for a single day. "Forgive me, madam," he said, and there was no cruelty in it now, only the careful courtesy of a desperate man minding his manners. "Have we met? I should be ashamed to have forgotten." "You should," Frances agreed pleasantly, and let the sentence sit there, and watched him not understand it. "Sit, Your Grace. We have a great deal to discuss, and your time, I imagine, is shorter than mine. You have come about the mortgages." He sat. A duke sat in a tradesman's widow's study, because the tradesman's widow held the roof over his head in her folded hands, and Frances Weston, who had once been turned out of his house with a single trunk and 3 words ringing in her ears, poured him a cup of tea he was too proud to want, and too ruined to refuse, and did not let her hand shake doing it. "The position is simple," she said. "Your father borrowed against the outlying farms. Mr. Dunmore here continued the practice, with enthusiasm, for 9 years. The interest has not been served in 4. The notes fall due at Lady Day, and there is no possibility, none, Your Grace. I have seen your books. Or rather, I have seen the books Mr. Dunmore keeps, which are a separate document from the books he shows you, that the estate can meet them." She said it without triumph, which was somehow worse than triumph. Which means that at Lady Day, Wycombe, the home farm, the village, the church living, the lot, becomes mine. Unless you and I agree otherwise in this room. Across the carpet, Mr. Dunmore made a sound. "Your Grace, this woman, Miss Dunmore," Frances said, not raising her voice. "You may wait in the hall. You and I will have our own conversation presently, and you will not enjoy it, and there is no sense spoiling it by halves." She looked at him until he went, and the going of him told the Duke more than any ledger could. When the door had shut, the Duke set down the tea he had not drunk. He was 36, gone grey early at the temples, from a decade of holding up a house that a trusted man had been quietly carrying away beneath him, and he had walked into this room with the last of his pride and was watching it become irrelevant. "You will forgive me," he said quietly. "You speak as though there is something between us beyond the debt. My sister looks as though she has seen a ghost. My steward looks as though he has seen the devil. I am plainly the only man in this room who does not know what is happening in it. I find I am too tired to pretend otherwise. Who are you, madam?" And Frances Weston opened the worn little ledger that had sat closed beneath her hands, the one she had carried out of his house 9 years before, and turned it to a page very near the front, and slid it across the desk to him. To understand what the Duke read, you must go back to the spring of 1809, when the woman across the desk had been 21 and called nothing grander than Frances Brooke, companion to the old Dowager Duchess of Wycombe, the Duke's grandmother, a poor clergyman's daughter taken into the great house to read aloud and windwool and be quiet, and who had been so very good at being quiet that the household had stopped seeing her at all. She had not minded the quiet. She had used it. A girl whom no one looks at can see everything, and Frances Brooke saw, among other things, that the figures Mr. Dunmore the steward read out to the failing old dowager each quarter did not agree with the figures in the rent books the tenants signed, that there was a gap between what the estate took in and what the estate was told it took in, a gap the precise width of a steward's greed. She had a head for numbers the way other people have an ear for music. She could not help the hearing of it, and being 21 and honest and not yet wise, she had begun, in a plain little pocket ledger of her own, to keep the true figures beside the false ones. The old dowager had died that April. And within the month, with his protectress in the ground, and the new young Duke wild, with the grief of losing his father and his grandmother inside 2 years, and leaving everything, in the hands of the steward who had served them both, Mr. Dunmore had moved to remove the one person under that roof who could read a column of figures and had been caught looking at his. He had not accused her of anything. That would have meant an inquiry. He had simply told the Duke that the late dowager's companion was no longer needed, that she was a plain, silent, friendless creature of no particular use, that she made the housemaids uneasy with her watching, and that the kindest thing was to let her go with a quarter's wages. And the Duke, 27, hollowed out, signing whatever was put before him so that the signing would stop, had agreed. Frances had asked to see him before she went. It was the one bold thing she had done in 21 quiet years. She had stood in the very study she now owned, in a stuff gown gone shiny at the elbows, with her hands folded and her heart going like a bird against a window, and she had waited while the young Duke read a letter and did not look up. Your Grace, she had said, when she could not bear the silence another moment. Mr. Dunmore tells me I am to go. I wish to ask whether there might be a place for me yet. I keep accounts well, better than well. Your grandmother trusted my figures, and I have seen things in this house's books I believe your Grace would wish to know. I ask very little. I have nowhere in particular to be. She had meant to tell him about the ledger then. She had the words ready, the whole of her courage gathered into one sentence. There are figures that do not agree, your Grace, and the man who keeps them is the man who would have me gone. She had opened her mouth to spend it. And the Duke of Wycombe, 27, hollowed out, wanting only the grief to be over and the room to be empty, had looked at the plain, quiet girl for perhaps 3 seconds, not cruelly, only carelessly, the way a man glances at a thing already half carried out the door, and spoken first. I am sure you mean well, but you have nothing this house requires. Good day. And the sentence she had gathered her whole courage to say had died unspoken in her mouth, because there is no telling the truth to a man who has already decided you are no one, and Frances Brooke had carried that silence out the door and learned from it the lesson that made her, that the world does not trouble to hear the quiet, and so the quiet had better build something it cannot help but look at. She had walked out with one trunk. And Mr. Dunmore had bled the dukedom for 9 years more, undisturbed, because the only person who had ever caught him reading a false figure was gone. The Duke read the front page of the ledger, the true figures and the false, in a careful girl's hand, dated 1809, and looked up at the woman he had dismissed, and the colour left his face by degrees, the way the light leaves a room. You wrote this, he said, before you knew. 9 years ago you knew what he was. I knew what he was, Frances said. And you told me I had nothing your house required, and you were so very nearly right, your Grace, because the one thing your house required, that spring, was precisely me, and you put it out the door with a quarter's wages and never learned my name before the world learned what was passing at Westhaven. And it would, for a county notices when a duke's carriage stands 3 hours in a widow's drive. There was the rest of that strange first afternoon, and the things said in it that neither of them had planned to say. She might have ruined him in a sentence. That was the fact that hung in the study like smoke. She held the paper. Lady Day was 6 weeks off. She had every right and every reason to let the notes fall due and take Wycombe stone by stone, and the county would have called it sound business, and the Duke could not have said a word against it. He had handed her the means of his own undoing 9 years ago, and forgotten he had done it. He understood this, sitting across from her, and what he did then was the first thing in 9 years that made Frances Weston revise her opinion of him. He did not bluster, and he did not beg, and he did not reach for his rank. He stood and he bowed to her, fully, the bow a duke gives an equal, which a duke gives almost no one, and he said, "Then I am at your mercy, Mrs. Weston, and I find I have earned every inch of it. I dismissed a woman of more worth than my whole estate because she was quiet, and I was grieving, and it was easier than thinking. You have spent 9 years becoming the answer to a question I was too small to ask. Do what you like with the debt. But I would be obliged, before you do, if you would let me say that I am sorry, not for the debt. For the 3 seconds. I have thought about a great many of my failures since this house began to fall. I had forgotten that one entirely, which is the worst thing I can tell you about the man I was. And Frances, who had rehearsed this reunion 10,000 times, and in every rehearsal had been the one in command of it, found her command deserting her, because she had armored herself against his cruelty and had no armor at all against this. Your Grace, she said, and her voice was not quite level, you may keep your apologies. I did not build all of this to collect them, and I will not have you think I spent 9 years working toward the pleasure of watching you grovel on my carpet. Stop telling me what kind of man you were. I am not the one you must answer to for that. The 40 families in your village whose rents that man stole are the ones you wronged, and they cannot read a ledger to prove it. So tell me what you mean to do for them, and I will tell you my price, and we will neither of us waste the afternoon on your conscience. The Duke looked at her for a long moment. What is your price? He asked. I have not decided, Francis said. I find, to my considerable annoyance, that it has changed in the last quarter of an hour. And she did not explain that, and he did not ask, and the smoke in the room shifted into something else. She showed him her county over the following fortnight. Because the price she had not yet named required him to understand what he had nearly bought with 3 careless seconds. She took him in her own gig, driving it herself, over the model farms she had drained, and the cottages she had rebuilt with slate roofs instead of rotting thatch, the school she had raised in the village, the dispensary, the straight new road, the mill where the women earned in a week what the Duke's tenants earned in a month. He had expected, the narrator must record, to be quietly humiliated by it, and was instead undone by something he had not braced for, which was admiration. The dangerous, disarming experience of watching a person be magnificently good at the thing they were made for. You did all of this, he said, on the ridge above Hartop, with the whole green sweep of it below them, from a quarter's wages and 1 trunk. And a husband, Francis said, who I will not let you diminish by leaving out. Josiah Weston was 30 years my elder, and he married a plain, dismissed companion that the whole of Leeds thought beneath him, and he taught me everything I could not teach myself, and he left me the concern and the freedom to grow it. And he is 3 years dead, and I miss his counsel every single day. I did not do this alone. No one does anything alone. I only did it without you. She was quiet a moment. Which was the making of me. I have thought about that. If you had kept me on, Your Grace, I should be a duchess's companion still, winding wool, growing old in a corner. You did me the greatest cruelty and the greatest kindness of my life in the same 3 seconds, and I have never been able to forgive you for either. Because they are the same act. The wind came up off the moor and moved the grey wool of her gown, and he was standing nearer to her than the conversation required, near enough that 1 step would have closed it, and neither of them took the step, and the air between them did the work neither would. I should like, the Duke said carefully, to court you. I am aware of the absurdity of saying so to the woman who holds my ruin in a desk drawer. I am aware it sounds like the most contemptible kind of calculation. I have turned it over a dozen ways to find an honest one, and the only honest one I have is this. I did not see you when you had nothing, and I am terrified that the man I am will be told he only sees you now because you have everything. So I will say it badly and plainly, and let you judge it. It is not the everything I cannot stop thinking about. It is the ledger. It is a girl who saw the truth when no one was looking and kept it for 9 years. I should have given my whole estate to be the kind of man who saw her then. I cannot be. I can only be the one who sees her now and asks. She did not answer him on the ridge. She drove him back to Westhaven in a silence that was not refusal, and that evening, because the hour had grown late and the roads were bad, he stayed to supper, and afterward they sat on either side of the great study hearth, with the fire burning down between them, and the worn little ledger closed on the desk in the dark behind her. You have not told me my price, he said at last. I have not decided it, she said. I told you it changed. It is a great inconvenience to me, Your Grace, you have no idea. For 9 years I knew exactly what I wanted from you, to the farthing. I wanted you to need me, and not have me. and know what you had thrown away. I built half a county on the strength of wanting it. She turned the ring on her widow's hand, her husband's ring, the way she did when she was deciding whether to be honest. And then you walked into my study a fortnight ago, ruined and grey and far too tired to lie to me, and you apologized for the 3 seconds before you apologized for the £60,000, and I have been no use to anyone since. You have ruined a very fine revenge. I had it furnished and curtained and lived in, and you have made it uninhabitable. I am sorry, he said, and they both heard that he was not. No, you are not. A flicker of firelight moved across her still face. Neither am I. That is the trouble. He rose and crossed to the hearth and stood by it, and she rose too and stood near the desk. And there was the width of the worn turkey carpet between them and the fire going down to embers, and the whole 9 years standing in the room with them. One step would have closed it. She watched him not take it. Watched the Duke, who could have any drawing room in England, hold himself still on the far side of a tradesman's widow's carpet, because he had thrown her away once for being easy to overlook, and would sooner burn than reach for her one moment before she chose to be reached for. Ask me again in the morning, Francis said, very low, when I have my sense back, and it was as near to yes as she had come to anything in 9 years. And he heard it, and he bowed, and he went up to his room without crossing the carpet, and it was the not crossing that undid her last wall entirely. The morning, as it happened, did not give them the asking. The morning gave them Dunmore. For Dunmore was not finished, because men like Dunmore are never finished until they are stopped. He had spent the fortnight not idle. Turned out of Westhaven, dismissed at last from the dukedom service, facing the certainty that the woman with the ledger meant to expose 9 years of theft, the steward did the thing such men do when cornered. He reached for the one weapon that costs nothing, which is a story. He went into the market towns and the coaching inns and the back parlours of the West Riding, and he told them about Mrs. Weston of Westhaven, how a clergyman's nobody of a daughter had wormed her way into a great house, been turned out for prying, and he had documents, he said. He had been the dead Mr. Weston's man of business too, in his time, married a dying old man, and turned his honest will to her own profit, cutting out a nephew who was the rightful heir, on a deathbed where only she had been present. That the whole fortune she paraded was got by a sharp woman's hand on a dying man's pen. That she was no widow but a thief, and the county had let a thief buy up its mortgages, and a thief was about to take a duke's ancient house. It was a lie, and it was a good lie, because it took the true shape of her life, the dismissal, the much older husband, the sudden wealth, and gave every true fact a rotten heart. By the end of the week it was in the county. By the end of the week there were men who had tipped their hats to Mrs. Weston for 3 years, who looked at their boots when her gig went by, and the Duke of Wycombe, who had been seen courting her, found the lie reaching for him too, under her spell, ruined and grasping, selling his name to a deedmonger's widow. She sent him away. She did it for the reason such women always do it, to spare him, and she did it in her own study with her voice perfectly level, telling him their business would be concluded through solicitors, that there would be no court for him to pay in the West Riding if he kept her company, that he had a sister to settle and a name 8 centuries old, and no business spending either on a woman the county had decided was a fraud. Go back to Wycombe, your grace, she said. I will not foreclose. The farms are safe and the families are safe, and that is the price, and it was always going to be the price. I decided it that first afternoon. You owe me nothing further. Go home. She was sending him away to protect him. He had done the same to her, once, and called it something else, and only one of the two of them, this time, understood the difference. He understood it. He had spent 9 years too small to see her. He was not going to spend the rest of his life that way. The reckoning came on quarter day at the Wycombe Assembly Rooms, where the gentry of the county had gathered, and where Dunmore, emboldened, half drunk on his own returning consequence, stood up among them to say it all aloud at last: the deathbed, the forged will, the prying nobody made good by theft, with the county listening and Frances Weston standing very straight and alone by the cold hearth, because she had learned long ago that you meet such things on your feet. And it was Frances who finished it, not the Duke, though the Duke was there and would have torn the room apart for her. She let Dunmore talk himself to the end of his story. Then she crossed the floor, and she set her worn little pocket ledger on the table, where every soul could see it, and she opened it not to the front page now, but to the back, to 9 years of a different kind of entry. Mr. Dunmore says my husband's will was forged on a deathbed where only I was present, she said, clear and unhurried, the voice that had settled a flooded coal seam in 3 sentences. Here is the name of the second witness to that will, a Leeds attorney living yet, whom Mr. Dunmore knows perfectly well, for Mr. Dunmore once tried to bribe him and failed. Here is the date Mr. Dunmore was dismissed from my late husband's service for theft 6 years before he repeated the performance on the Duke. And here, she turned a page, here is the true account of the Wycombe estate beside the false one Mr. Dunmore kept, in my own hand, dated the spring of 1809, the spring he had me turned out of the great house for the crime of noticing. I was too quiet to be worth keeping, he told the old Duke. He was right to be frightened of the quiet, gentlemen. The quiet ones are the ones who write it all down. She looked at the steward, mild as milk, the way she had looked at him across her desk a fortnight before. You should not have come to my county with a story, Mr. Dunmore. I have spent 9 years buying the deeds to every fact in it. She closed the little book then, and laid her hand flat upon it, and turned at last to the room itself, to the gentry who had tipped their hats to her for 3 years, and studied their boots for 1 week, the bankers and magistrates and squires' wives, who had been so very ready to believe that a quiet woman who rose must have stolen the ladder. You were all so willing to hear it, she said, and there was no heat in it, which made it land the harder. A clergyman's daughter, turned out of a great house, married to an old man, suddenly rich. Of course she is a thief. What else could she be? It did not once occur to this county that she might simply have been the only one in the room paying attention. That is the thing you might take home tonight, if you take nothing else. You spent 9 years not looking at me, and then 1 week believing the first man who told you what you already wished were true. I have never minded being unseen, gentlemen. I have made my whole fortune in the room you were not watching. But you will not, I think, make the mistake of underestimating me twice. There was no court in the West Riding that mattered after that, save the one in the Assembly Room, and that one delivered its verdict in the oldest way a room can, by turning every face at once away from the man at the table and toward the woman at the hearth. Garrick Dunmore was taken up within the month on the attorney's evidence and transported for the embezzlement the ledger proved, and the county that had looked at its boots when her gig passed found its hat brims again in a remarkable hurry, which Frances accepted with exactly as much warmth as it deserved, which was not a great deal. The Duke of Wycombe crossed the emptying room to her when it was done, in front of all of them, his name 8 centuries old, and not one bit of it held back. And he did not bow this time. He took her hand, the hand that had carried 1 trunk out of his house, and a ledger that had now carried it back, and he said, loud enough for the county to hear and remember, I told this woman 9 years ago that she had nothing my house required. I have come to correct the record. She is the only thing it ever required, and I have spent a fortnight discovering that I require it too. Marry me, Mrs. Weston. Not to save Wycombe, you have already done that, and want nothing for it. Marry me because I was a fool at 27 and a ruined man at 36, and the one true thing I have managed in between was to finally see you. I am asking. You may make me ask twice. I have heard you are fond of that. And Francis Weston, who had remembered every word he ever said to her, found that the only word she wanted to keep was the last one. Once will do, she said, this time, and the thing she had carried for 9 years set itself down at last. By the following spring the home farm at Wycombe had slate on its roofs and honest figures in its books. And the new Duchess of Wycombe ran the estate and the mills and the half of the West Riding she had built before she ever became a duchess, from the very study where, as a girl of 21, she had been told she had nothing to offer. She kept that. She had it carved, in fact, very small, on the lintel of the estate school she endowed in the village. Not the cruelty, but the answer to it. Mark the quiet ones. The children never knew what it meant. She did. Garrick Dunmore went to Botany Bay and was not heard from again, which the 40 families whose rents he had stolen counted a milder fate than they would have chosen, and the families prospered, and that was the part of the reckoning Frances cared for most. Lady Augusta, who had recognized her across the carpet when her own brother could not, came to live near them, and became, in time, the sister Frances had never had. And it was Augusta who teased her. On a bright morning in the study, with the worn little ledger lying closed on the desk between them, as it had lain that first afternoon, that she had got the whole of the West Riding and a duke besides, and what on earth was left to want? Nothing, said Frances Weston, Duchess of Wycombe, and reached over and laid her hand flat on the cover of the ledger. The plain little book that a plain, quiet girl had kept when no one was looking, and carried through 9 years, and a marriage, and a fortune, and a reckoning. The book that had been worth more in the end than every acre it bought back. Nothing at all. I wrote it all down. You see, every word. And out beyond the window the green county ran to the edge of the moor, every farm and mill and slate roof of it, in the keeping at last of the one person who had always, even when no one troubled to look, been paying attention.